I've borne witness to a fair bit of human behavior, gentlemen, in my nigh 50 winters. And there's one particular behavior that I just see recur time and again when it comes to men. And that is men who allege to be in possession of knowledge and who think, at least, that they are well guarded against the worst of human interactions, specifically when it comes to women. Now, this isn't a criticism, mind you. It's just a demonstration and an example of human nature. We are, at the end of the day, somewhat hairless, primitive apes hurtling about on a mud rock stuck in the middle of nowhere in the universe. And as such, we really shouldn't expect too much from ourselves at the end of the day. Now, what am I referring to specifically? I'm referring to any notion that a man has built up a great bit of knowledge. You know, the type of knowledge that's typically associated with various pills. Red pill, BP, etc., etc. Now, all of these pills, if you will, provide some insight into human nature. Not everything is accurate, but a lot of it can be. And the question then becomes, how do you apply it? How do you integrate it into your life? Now, for the record, this applies to everything. I've always said, going on for something like 12 years now, maybe even longer, that there's a difference between understanding something and integrating into the system, so to speak, your system, your mind, and then applying it to the outside world in your interactions. It's relatively easy to understand something, but understanding is just the beginning. An application of said knowledge is always much, much harder because it implies a much deeper understanding, and it implies, above all, a full integration into the system, which is your mind, your body, your life. And one thing I've observed quite frequently in the last couple of years is a phenomenon amongst so-called BP guys who think they really get things, and maybe they do. Maybe they've read a lot of studies. Maybe they've read a lot of articles, and they just had their observations about life and how things seem to work, and put together that constitutes a pretty decent body of knowledge, all things considered. But when push comes to shove, when they're up against something that normally should be a red flag in many cases, they break. They break not in the sense that they fall apart completely, although that exists as well, and we can talk about it, but rather the knowledge they have about human nature themselves, specifically with respect to women, tends to fall apart rather quickly. Now, I'm sure you've seen similar things as well, both in real life and online, but typically the encounter and scenario goes down like this. You have some guy who is aware. You could say he's red pill aware or he's BP aware, and he encounters a woman after having zero experience with women whatsoever, typically quite young, but not exclusively, and his entire behavior, his entire demeanor changes almost in an instant, and all the knowledge that he gathered over the years essentially fizzles into nothing in an instant. Now, some guys are a little bit harder than that, and they don't break instantly. It's just a question of time. But I do have to say that the knowledge that they possess becomes useless. And this is true, as I said, in life across the board. You might have a cursory understanding of things. You might even have a pretty good understanding of things. But a true understanding of anything is very difficult to achieve because it needs to be integrated, and you need to be able to apply it actively. It's like any skill set. Maybe you're learning how to code, and you're learning a certain coding language, and you have a basic understanding of how it works. But can you apply that on the fly? Do you understand in particular situations how the underlying structure might work, this sort of thing? Or maybe you're studying history, and you know, roughly speaking, that Sparta eventually conquered Athens in the so-called Peloponnesian War. But can you go into the details? Can you explain it? Do you understand the nuts and bolts of it? As I said, this applies to every domain of knowledge. The only thing is, the twist here, is that when it comes to human biology, and in particular reproductive biology and psychology, it's a lot harder to apply the knowledge that you have learned because you are combating yourself in some sense. If a pretty girl shows a modicum of kindness to a guy who's never had any attention whatsoever from the opposite sex, what do you think is going to happen? I've talked about this frequently in the past. I like to use the mythical pizza analogy. You might be familiar with it by now, but basically imagine that pizza were the greatest gourmet food in existence, and only the elect few, the multimillionaires and billionaires, could actually afford to eat it. Well, slowly but surely there would be a rumor trickling down that pizza were the most incredible thing ever, even though it's not. It's just pizza at the end of the day. But that would be the perception of it, because most people in such a situation would not be able to obtain it because it's just too expensive. Well, the same applies to an inkwell or some guy that just doesn't have the female attention as some guys might get. They break because it's novel and because their biology is pushing them in the direction. Now, I'm not assigning blame here. Quite the opposite, in fact. It is difficult, perhaps beyond difficult, to actually manage to remain vigilant in situations that test your knowledge, but more importantly, your underlying biology. And the worst case scenario I've seen, and I've seen this happen many times to other men, hell, it's even happened to me, it happened to me over 20 years ago in the past, is when a very pretty girl has sunk her claws into you, and you're simply bedazzled by her looks. But there are so many opportunity costs associated with it. For example, she's mentally ill, she's bipolar, she has borderline, or God forbid she's willing or even inclined to physically aggress against you. What do you do in that situation? Well, the logical thing to do is to jump out of the plane and pull the string for the parachute and get the hell out of Dodge. But oftentimes, it's not that easy because we build stories up for ourselves. And the reality is, especially in cases of average-looking guys, and this happened to me many moons ago, as I said, over 2 decades ago, I had an ex that was a borderliner, but she was very, very good-looking, and probably the best-looking woman I ever had in my life. It's just that she was basically insane, and she inflicted tremendous opportunity costs on me. Emotionally, she drained me completely. Mentally, I was less fit. It affected my already poor sleep, which then had a cascade effect on other things, and eventually, I couldn't even do my job anymore, and so I got fired. And stuff like that, to be perfectly frank, is just the tip of the iceberg. I've talked to and met guys who've endured and gone through a lot worse. We're talking about serious physical abuse, where they, in the most extreme situations, barely came out alive. Now, I'm talking about these extremes not because they're the most common scenario, but just to illustrate and demonstrate that this is a real reality. If you're an average guy, or God forbid a below average guy, and some female is showing you attention, that could be the beginning of the end. Because oftentimes, especially in an online environment, the woman is showing some guy attention, but it's nothing serious whatsoever. She's doing it because she knows it's easy and she can manipulate the guy very easily. So what do you do in such a scenario? Well, you reinforce the knowledge you have. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to be honest about your station in life, to be honest, and not delude yourself. If a very attractive woman is all of a sudden showing interest in you, and you don't have money, you're not particularly good looking, this is the first time or one of the rare occasions ever happened in your life, what are the chances that this woman is showing you interest that is legitimate, authentic, and sincere? Slim to none, I would argue. And unfortunately, that's the only way you can protect yourself. And even though that runs counter to your innermost biology, your instincts, your drive, and your desires because you felt deprived for so long, that is the only way you can really defend against this type of predation. Now, in the best case scenario, it'll be a temporary thing. She'll show you attention, but that's about it. But in the worst case scenario, as I said, it can turn into something along the lines of stalking or even worse. And I have seen guys whose lives have been utterly destroyed by, to be perfectly honest, absolutely bad fecal matter, crazy women who had no inhibitions whatsoever, were completely unrestrained, and most importantly, were able to hide their behavior from the outside world. This was an issue I had to deal with over 20 years ago with my borderline ex, because she managed to put on this mask towards the outside world that indicated that she was quote-unquote normal when she was anything but normal. But towards me, say her sister, her parents, the mask dropped. So basically people she was close to. And you absolutely need to be on guard about this sort of thing, because if you're not, they will devour you. The reality is that it is a paper-thin veil of knowledge and protection that a lot of guys think they possess. And oftentimes, and I hate to say this, it's not even true knowledge. They're just using it as a proxy for knowledge because they simply can't come to terms with the reality of their situation, which may in fact be absolutely terrible and suck, which doesn't mean they can't improve it in some way, but they refuse to accept the knowledge about human nature at its core. Like I said, in such situations, the knowledge is paper thin, and they are going to be the first men down. And that's why I'm talking about this, because I am concerned for such men, and they need to think about this in the off case that something like that might happen to them. Anyway, as always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my patrons. You guys are the best. Without you, this channel could not exist. Thank you so much. And if the rest of you can hit the bell icon, it'd be much appreciated to be informed of my videos, because a lot of people are not watching them these days. And if you can engage in the usual YouTube jazz of liking the video, commenting, subbing, and sharing, it'd be much appreciated. If I'm still alive, I'll check you out then. Until the next time, may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye for now.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.